Davina Desmarais.
Amy?
Try my camera briefly anyway. Amy McGlashan.
Suzanne?
Beth?
Who else from the board did I miss? Anyone?
Henry?
Oh, Henry? Henry, you just FYI, your mic's a little bit scratchy, so I don't know if it's a connection but just a heads up on that. Peter B?
Peterborough Superintendent?
Will?
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Caitlin?
Caitlin Steele, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Great, and Vicki?
Vicki Wells, Director of Student Services.
Super. And then Peter, could you announce anyone who is on as attendees from the community?
I can. Amy Mason, Barb Wilson, Cheryl Cesario, Chris Kramer, Aaron Robinson, Hugh McLaughlin, John Flowers, Karen Duguay, Kelly Flynn, Kurt Broderson, Perry Hansen, Ruth Bernstein, and Tanya Scuteri.
Great, thank you. At this time, as always, we would like to open up the floor to public comment. If you do have a public comment, please raise your Zoom hand and Peter will bring you over to the speaker portion of the meeting.
Okay, Kurt Broderson.
Hi, Kurt. If you're speaking, just a heads up, you're on mute. Oh, now you're off.
Yep, I got it. Thanks.
No worries.
I wrote a letter to the Addison Independent a week and a half ago, or 2 weeks ago now, and I just wanted to read that here to enter it into the discussion in regards to sixth grade moving to MUMS. And since there are a fair number of visitors here who don't know who I am, I'll sort of start with the same disclosure I put in the paper. My wife is a teacher at MUMS with over 20 years of service and dedication. I am a former middle school teacher, and my daughter will be in the first sixth grade class to attend MUMS if the move goes through as currently planned. I cannot state strongly enough how ill-planned I think that move is and how detrimental it will be, particularly at this moment in time, sort of in the throes of the pandemic, without adequate resources being provided to ensure that it's successful. In John Flowers' article about MUMS readying for the sixth graders in the November 5th issue of the paper, he talked about how the version 2.0 plan was scuttled last spring. That was presented to the ACSD board. That same night, a large contingent of MUMS teachers attended to oppose the plan for its many flaws, not just the potential loss of instructional time that was noted in the article. That plan was predicated on no increase in staff or space, despite adding approximately 120 students to MUMS. Those two criteria were described as non-negotiables, which makes as much sense to me as adding 120 students while saying we won't use any additional water. While the revised proposal described as version 3.0 includes a staffing increase of 2.5 FTEs for music and languages, it also includes cutting a team from 4 to 3. There is a misperception in the community that sixth grade teachers would be coming to MUMS, but that's not correct. Teams would increase in size from approximately 65 to 120, and this is a team in name only. I think one of the main reasons for the success of MUMS in the past has been due to the quality of the teachers and the quality of the instruction. The small size of the teams has contributed to this success, as teachers have time to get to know each student individually. Greatly increasing the size of the teams will result in less personalized learning, less time to provide individual feedback, and less of a connection between students and teachers. I am normally a fan of looping for 2 years to provide continuity of learning and stronger connections between students and teachers. I was sad to see that go away at Mary Hogan, for example. However, nearly doubling the size of teams and looping from 6th to 7th grade may also have the unintended consequence of decreasing the quality of instruction, because those teachers would have twice the number of students they currently do while needing to develop and maintain 2 years worth of curriculum. I think version 3.0 should be more accurately be described as a return to a junior high model with 6 classes a day lasting 49 minutes, as opposed to the middle school model that has been the foundation of MUMS's success in the past. That 49-minute class period represents not a potential loss of instructional time compared to what's current, but a significant loss of time. When you combine it with the flexible scheduling on Wednesdays, that's a massive loss in instructional time in the core classes. And let me point out here that I am in favor of flexible Wednesdays and the interdisciplinary studies and community connections that they might foster, but we need to recognize that there will be a corresponding reduction in instructional time across all other subjects. The waterfall schedule mentioned in the article may have the purported benefit of staggering what time classes are held, so that a student's math class, for example, is not always first thing in the morning or right after lunch, which are usually less productive times. But it has the practical effect of being logistically difficult to maintain, as well as being confusing for students to follow. I taught in a waterfall schedule at Mount Abe, and it is practically very difficult to handle. Nowhere in the article did it mention another issue, which I think is worthy of discussion, and that's classrooms. Given the 50% increase in student body, it's more than likely that teachers will need to share rooms, and that some teachers may be moving from room to room throughout the day. This doesn't seem like much to an outsider, but I like to think of a classroom as a nest for both students and teachers alike. And that last part mentioning teachers there, in the article, there were no quotes from teachers. And I think that kind of pointed out a glaring omission, is hearing from teachers about this plan at the school board meeting level. I think their voices have been ignored in the planning, as evidenced by a need for a large group of them to show up last spring to make sure that version 2.0 was defeated. The faculty and staff of ACSD are stretched unimaginably thin right now, trying to teach both in-person and remote students. And the plan to move the 6th grade to MUMS has not received the attention nor the resources to be successful. I believe that 6th graders are developmentally ready to be in a 6th through 8th grade middle school, but I believe we need to give them and their teachers everything they need to be successful. For that reason, we need more discussion in the community and with teachers before making the move. And that's the end of my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, we have Cheryl Cesario. And I found Betty over in the attendees too.
Great.
Am I up?
Yes, Cheryl.
Yep.
Oh, thank you. Well, first, I just wanted to say I attended the last meeting. I think that was the 23rd. I see she just joined now. I wanted to thank Betty. I'm sure others out here listening in appreciated the question she asked, which was looking beyond, are we going to look beyond just a 4-school model? Basically inquiring what everyone out here is asking, which is to continue to consider a model without the consolidation. So thank you for at least broaching the question. It's a complex issue beyond just the straight up financials. And it feels like the board as a whole is applying a reductionist strategy to a very nuanced issue. And there needs to be more creativity. When I asked back in the fall how you were going to evaluate the potential effects on the communities themselves by closing the schools, the response I got was that it's not in your purview. I don't understand how the long-term effects on the communities is not your responsibility. Exhaustive research on rural education systems show through data that the promises of consolidation all across this country, the idea of achievement gains, financial savings, reduction in administration, they're often never realized. The drawbacks are a long list, longer bus rides, limited opportunities for the kids who commute further to participate in after-school activities, less individual attention from the teachers and staff, and reduced parental involvement. The argument for consolidation that we keep hearing come up, equity and efficiency, it's a flawed argument and it's inaccurate. Consolidation often saves no money, bigger schools guarantee nothing academically, and low-income children actually do better in smaller facilities. So consolidation only serves bureaucratic and political purposes. Lastly, communities lose an important social institution, and that loss diminishes the town itself, sometimes to the verge of abandonment. If you want to see for 1 minute what that looks like in Vermont, take a drive over to Hancock. You know, we're an aging state. We all know this is a huge problem. We have lots of challenges ahead. But rather than resignation, what about some inspiration? Why are we not working towards a solution that furthers the ability for rural communities to thrive, creating places where our kids want to stay? And I just believe that what you're trying to push through is going to have the exact opposite effect. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay. Next up on the agenda is to approve the minutes of November 23rd. If I could have a motion.
Moved. Lorraine.
Motion to approve, Lorraine, a second.
Second.
Chip, I believe I saw.
Yes.
Any discussion on the minutes? Great, all those in favor? Aye, any opposed? Any opposed? Great. Moved. Next up on the agenda is to approve the ACSD bills. Chip, I'll turn that over to you, please.
There was one set of bills that were read on the 7th of December. Out of the general fund, it was bills for a total of $481,563.06. I make a motion that we pay the bills. I presume Victoria read them also.
So moved. And we have a second. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, so moved. And next up, report of the superintendent. Peter, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I submitted the monthly report. You all can see, you know, as principals and central office staff share the work that they're doing, that there's a ton going on right now. And, you know, we talked a lot about the ramp up to Thanksgiving and what the impacts could be. We dealt with our first cases after, during the break and after the break at primarily at Mary Hogan. And so it's been, I think it's been a kind of a time of transition, really, as we get used to having some cases in our schools, working together to make sure that protocols are in place, that we're doing the things that we need to do. You know, I have to say that staff are just doing an amazing job across the board. They're juggling so many things. And you know, Kurt earlier mentioned the balancing of remote and in person, and I think beyond that, there's just there are kind of countless things that staff are doing to keep things moving and keep students getting the kinds of services they need, and making sure that we're able to continue to keep schools open at a time when you know, as we look across the country, that's a real challenge. So, you know, I think overall, you know, our goal at the central office and in terms of supporting staff, we're doing as much as we can to try to take as much off the plate. We're looking at potentially shifting some of our supervision and evaluation this year to lessen that load, except in places where we kind of really need to continue to do that work. we're also looking ahead to some of the challenges that may come after break. Staffing, as I've mentioned previously, continues to be, somewhat of a challenge. We have some of our principals in some of our schools filling in classes. So, our goal right now is to, be sure that folks are getting what they need, that schools continue to stay open, and that we're really, really tending to and aware of the wellness needs of everyone. And I think there's a feeling of a glimmer of hope as vaccines are now sent across the country, and we start to see that there may be an end to this. But I would say that it's been really challenging, and it's pushed folks to their limits just in terms of being able to continue to deal with some of the things that in a kind of a normal reality we just kind of flow through. Right now it's a lot harder to do that. So the one thing that I see happening across the district is people relying on each other, being honest with each other, being transparent, and seeking out help when it's needed. And I think that's why we're in the place we're in, and I feel really good about that. Coming back from break, we had some challenges with, and I think understandably so, with some families looking at both some of what was shared prior to Thanksgiving break in terms of what could happen around COVID transmission and attendance in looking at staying remote or staying in person, and trying to make determinations, families making determinations around what they were comfortable with. We are continuing to work on our kind of remote and supporting families in doing what they would like to do. We have some limitations, which we've shared with people. We sent a survey out last week and are looking at what the needs are going to be going into second semester to try to support as many families as possible that want to do remote learning. We aren't able at the elementary level currently to allow people to move back and forth because the remote academy are separate courses. They're not housed within the in-person class that a student might be attending. So that has been one of the challenges, I think, of this month. And board members may have talked to families that are kind of struggling with figuring out how to make things work for them. And we're trying to be as flexible as possible. We're also aware of teachers and what they're able to sustain in terms of, as I mentioned previously, that balance between taking care of all the students that are in your class every day, and then another cohort of students that are outside of your class. So again, it's like it's another COVID reality of doing our best, and I think we're certainly aware of the issues and are trying to support everybody as we get through this time period. I did want to mention one thing. We had talked previously about equity, literacy, and anti-racism training, and I have been working. I found a consultant, Marissa Coleman. She's a clinical psychologist at UVM. Has been doing this work in Winooski. I've heard great things about her. I've been working with her. She provided me with a list of questions that she said as a next step would be great for the board to engage in to determine what kinds of work would best be suited for her to lead with us. So that is on our docket. I just want to give everyone a heads up. That's on our docket to find a time to, and potentially a separate meeting may be good to do that work, more of a kind of training type of meeting to discuss those questions and then talk about where we see that training going and what kind of course may be helpful from the different kinds of things that she does. With that's my report. Any questions about the world of education, pandemic, ACSD?
Well, a lot of questions about all those things, but
Yeah.
just the survey that you mentioned, who did that go out to? Was that just surveying folks who are already remote, or what was
No, that went out to everyone in the Friday update.
Oh, right. Okay.
You know that one that you read?
I did read it, and now I'm remembering the link, but I was thinking I didn't get a survey. I remember the link. Got
There
it.
was just a link, yeah.
Chip?
Peter, relative to this sort of juncture of online and live learning, I've had some questions of why we just don't stream the live learning on the computer to the person who isn't there but is at home. I think I know the answers to why we can't do that, but can you just elucidate those? Because some folks aren't quite sure why that is.
Well, we are doing that. We are doing that in many classes. We're not doing that across the board as a remote option, so to speak. We looked at that a lot, and the teaching and learning team this summer talked about that a lot and thinking about how are we going to work with the different phases of learning. So that was, one of the things they looked at was, should we do it's called synchronous instruction. I don't know what the percentage is of teachers that are using synchronous now. I know many are, and there are places where it's really helpful. There are other times when synchronous, without the right kind of prep and the right kind of work with the student prior to the synchronous teaching, is not as effective. So I think there are places where it's really effective. There are other places where it's not. Caitlin, do you have anything to add to that?
No, except, just to say that we've sort of given teachers the prerogative to decide whether streaming students in is pedagogically sound for a given lesson. If they're delivering straight lecture and you can stream students in to experience that lecture, that's one thing. If you're doing something that's highly engaging, it can be really distracting in terms of managing both the technology connection and the classroom at the same time. And it can be really hard for students to engage as well. I don't know how many of you have experienced being one of a minority of people zooming into an in-person meeting, and how hard it is to really engage meaningfully in that setting, especially when the people who are there in person are spread out 6 feet apart, so they're shouting across the room at a computer to you. And so we really have let teachers decide if and when live streaming is the right move to make to support the best possible learning for students. My impression is, I haven't done a survey of this, but my sort of rough impression is that it's happening more at the higher levels and less with younger students. But it would be interesting to actually explore and see if that stacks up quantitatively.
Thank you, because I think those are questions people have in a somewhat simplistic view of how this works, but I just felt that question needed to be elucidated a little bit more. Thank you.
Kyle.
Thank you, Mary. I think to speak in terms of a higher level, I guess in terms of the high school level, I think, again, as Mr. Burrows pointed out, the transparency, I think, among the teachers and the faculty is amazing. It's really grateful, I think, as a student, and I think the teachers are really working hard to make sure that the content is accessible for all students. And I do see flexibility within classes in all different levels throughout the high school. And I think that continues to be helpful for a variety of students. And so I would just point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Peter? Okay.
Should we go on to the next?
We should.
Okay, budget summary. So there's a memo. with a budget summary looking ahead to FY22. I'm going to allow Brittany to kind of provide a bit of a runway to that and start a conversation.
Hey, hello, everybody. This is one of those times when I feel like I'm always bringing the tough news. So our first draft of our budget will be presented next week on the 21st. This is sort of crunch time for getting our, our ducks in the row for the first draft, and we get information pretty fast and furious, and it seems to all come at once. So, excuse me, we wanted to give you a little bit of insight as to some of the things that we expect to drive the budget and the first draft. So we've already talked some about health insurance. The premiums increased by 9.8%. It's a significant cost driver. We also have insufficient data to determine the full effect that the new statewide healthcare benefits will have on us. That we'll start that on January 1st. So there are some things that we know what plans people are taking now, but it's the first year of a new system. So it's possible that it's not representative of the new norm. We don't yet know what our equalized pupil count is. That's due to me tomorrow. I hope that it comes tomorrow, although I'm hearing some scuttle that there's some problems with the data collection again. But we do know that the legislature has passed a hold harmless provision related to ADM, which is really the main component in the equalized pupil calculation. So that's going to help us. Because of that, I don't expect a substantial decrease in equalized pupils. But as we'll talk about in a little bit, I think that things are going to be tight enough that a small change can be impactful. The tax commissioner's letter came out, and that's attached as well. So it was a decrease in the property yield, which is essentially, if everything else was held level, a tax rate increase would result. And you probably, saw on WCAX and in Digger that the commissioner estimates that the average Vermont taxpayer's bill would increase by 9% under this yield. It's important to note that this is really just a recommendation from the tax commissioner at this point. The legislature can and often does change this in the spring, but it's the most accurate number that we'll have right now. And then really, the big breaking news is the excess spending threshold. So the excess spending threshold, we've seen it since its inception go up around 2.5% per year. This year it's going up by 0.18%, and that's the lowest increase that we've seen since the threshold's inception. And there's a couple components that go into this calculation. One is statewide ADM, and then the NEAP, which is basically the New England Economic Projection and like a CPI type thing, a consumer price index. So right now our ed spending per equalized pupil is above that without factoring in exemptions. So just sort of given the way that things roll up, it will be challenging to keep our ed spending per equalized pupil below the threshold without some substantial reductions and or use of fund balance. And that's one of the things that I wanted to bring forward tonight, was for the board to start thinking about and considering what a use of fund balance might be. This isn't typically something that we've done in the past as an ACSD board. And the reason for that, as we've talked about many times, is that when you use fund balance, it's essentially a planned deficit. So you build it in as revenue. And then the following year, it creates a cliff and you don't have that revenue. So you have to make all your roll-up costs up and the loss of revenue, basically. So we have not used that as a tool to reduce tax rates. But in this case, I think that it's something, we'll know more when we see on the 21st how much we would have to use to get it below the threshold to avoid tax rate implications. But I think that is something that the board should seriously consider, given our fund balance and given all the other things that are going on in terms of planning for the future and looking at ways to save for the future to try and do like a stopgap to get us through this year. I think that the effects could be substantial if we don't do that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Peter.
No, I mean, I think you've covered it well. I think the question about using the fund balance, we don't yet know what the extent of that is, but as an example, if we fill that hole this year to bring the cost per pupil down below that excess spending threshold. We expect our unaudited, currently, it will be audited soon, fund balance is around 900,000. So if we put a significant portion of that to the budget to bring it down, you know, next year's 3% roll up of cost, plus we'd have to find that, as Brittany said, that $900,000 too. So you can only do that really once or twice before you're in a really dire situation. And we've seen that happen, you know, up north. Addison Northwest had to do that over a couple different years, and, you know, resulted in, again, in that cliff that had to be addressed. So, so we'll know more next week, and we'll start to tackle that. But it is concerning. We weren't expecting the threshold to go up by 0.18. I think we've just been accustomed to 2 to 2.5%. So that was, I think, what we were talking about going into this year. And we knew it was going to be tight anyway with the 2.5% increase, but with the essentially flat threshold, I think it's much more significant. So we'll know more. We'll also be sharing some of the staffing, or we will be sharing the staffing information as well. And we are saving a little bit there, so that may help as well. So again, more coming next week, and we'll tackle it in earnest.
Yep. So, you know, mostly I just sort of wanted to get that idea in your head to start thinking about what that could mean and could look like, since it's out of the norm for the board.
Brittany, I have a question. You, historically, I would say, come across as a very prudent and appropriately conservative fiscal manager. And so it surprises me to hear you consider using fund balance to address a budget issue. Talk a little bit about what's in your head in support, or in tossing that out there as a consideration.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is just that we will have a fairly substantial fund balance. And I think that it's difficult to present a budget to the community with double taxation while you sit on a fund balance. So I think there's that. And then there's also, you should, in general, put one-time monies towards one-time costs. So I think that the board should consider using fund balance if the proposal is that there will be substantial cost savings realized in the following year. If the board does not think that, then it's another conversation.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Peter, C.
Thanks. The issue of the excess spending threshold is certainly something a lot of legislators, including me, are very interested in. This 0.18 increase at the same time that we're looking at a nearly 10% increase in healthcare just seems completely out of whack. Anyway, that being said, just a couple questions. Brittany, do you perchance know what this year's NEAP is?
I don't know it offhand. I can find it before the end of the meeting. I have the calculation.
But fair to say it's probably higher than 0.18%.
Yeah, I actually think that the statewide ADM is one of the things that's
is the culprit.
The NEAP is a little depressed from what I understand, but not depressed enough to do a 0.18%.
And just would you remind us what we're looking at for a FY20 fund balance?
For FY21 or I'm sorry, for FY20, it's around 900,000. It's unaudited.
Okay.
And then we also have, just about $1 million in our reserve funds right now.
Okay.
So when you combine those things,
we don't have. Yeah. So we don't have an anticipated fund. We don't have an anticipated fund balance number yet for FY21, I assume. So I assume it's way too early for that.
No, not with COVID either. I mean, normally I have a little bit more firm footing by now, but things are so out of whack. I look at the account lines and it's like, so yeah, no.
Plus the CRF funds too.
Yeah, we just got our CRF.
We're getting back for that.
Yeah, well, we just got our CRF grant agreement, which was about $1 million. So I now have to go through and sort of parse through what our expenses are and move them into grant funds. Then I have to write our ESSER grant application. And once I do that, I'll have a better idea. But I think that
So
we
that has
probably
the
have,
potential, that has the potential of increasing our FY20 fund balance. Would that be correct?
no, I'm not going to apply for FY20 funds for ESSER. I did get some FY20 funds approved in the CRF grant, so
Yeah,
that will increase it a little bit.
Okay.
So I think there's probably about $2 million at play in terms of total fund balance.
Okay. And I guess it's hard to imagine, but I wonder if there isn't a menu of one-time costs we could come up with to sort of, you know, if we have to go the route of using fund balance money, you know, and if we know that, okay, we know that we have this list of one-time costs, sort of make those match, that might blunt the trauma of using the fund balance the subsequent year. Just a thought.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Chip?
You know, Peter Connellan, having you on our board, obviously, and having sort of sitting on the education committee and having involved with that, it's helpful, but I'm not sure one person can make the difference. But it would seem that, you know, I'm always trying to look at where we sit in relation to all these other similar type districts, and I just cannot believe that other similar districts aren't in the same precarious positions. And if the state wants us all to go down in flaming whatever by having to cut so many costs in order to stay under the fund, under the limit, it's going to be a disaster for education in the state, I would think. I don't know.
I would say that the excess spending threshold, I think until this year has probably served its purpose in terms of being kind of an alarm bell saying, you know, you really need to take a look at your per pupil spending. I think this disparity this year between the healthcare increases and the excess spending threshold increase is so out of whack, it has to be looked at. And to answer your question about our neighboring districts, we've met with superintendents and board chairs with the other two in Addison County, and very much the same problem. And I'm sure it's very similar statewide.
I mean, misery likes company, but still, you know, I just,
yeah.
Well.
And Brittany, just for clarification, from a fund balance perspective, you know, when we're looking at the challenges that we have with facilities costs that we have not been able to address in the past, how do we think about those two things? So we're going into a time where we know we're starting to get to a breaking point with that world as well. Those which are traditionally considered one-time costs to address from a capital perspective those concerns. And now are we going to have to be choosing between the two in your mind?
Yeah, that's the rub. That's the rub, is sort of trying to think about what we're going to need to do in our facilities in the next couple of years, and what we need to do to get us through budget-wise. So again, I think that once I have a sense of if it's needed, which I think it will be, and how much it's needed, it will become more clear at the next meeting. So, you know, I probably wouldn't recommend using all of it. I think it's important to have, and that's something that the board may want to consider for the future is, you know, setting some sort of precedent saying, you know, we will not draw our reserve funds below X amount or something like that. I think that would be a healthy exercise for the board to consider.
Okay. Any other questions for Brittany?
The one thing I would add, just in terms of the threshold and what Peter was saying about the healthcare costs, you know, we saw when the threshold was established, it was pretty clear that every single district eventually, if your costs are going up by 3.5% and the threshold's going up by 2.5%, we were always going to hit it at some point. I think what's exacerbated it are are a number of different factors. One was the healthcare agreement that the state struck, which increased our costs pretty significantly. That happened last year, and it's now impacting our 22 budget most significantly. We're paying half of it in FY21, and then it starts in FY22. So that's one of the things that's happened. Our enrollment decline at the secondary level over the last 5 years has also, for us, it really accelerated our costs up towards that threshold. So, you know, I mean, we knew this was coming. We've been talking about this for a while, and so now I think we're in a place where we have to continue to be proactive, and I think the board has done an exceptional job at doing that. In looking ahead, not just to how do we get by this year, but how do we think about the next, and again, this comes back to the master planning, I think. How do we plan for a budget in 2, 3, 5 years, knowing kind of where we are and where we're headed? I've seen a lot of districts around the state just solely deal year to year. That's all they do. They see what their equalized pupil is. They see what they can afford. They trim here, they trim there, and then do it all again the next year. And I think that's as we are now at the threshold. I think it's even more important now than it was before in terms of being proactive.
And I also think that proactive nature doesn't just have to be directed towards the fiscal constraints that we're under due to these macro issues. I also think we have an opportunity in a variety of different ways, whether that be through the board or through other vehicles, to try to address the underlying challenges that we have from a demographic perspective. And what are we doing collectively to inspire and to build growth into our mindset as a state? And that means having great schools, and that means having great and strong foundations. And I believe, you know, what was commented today in the public comment, we're doing that as a board to try to solidify and stabilize our foundation here, but that doesn't mean that we're not also actively pursuing an inspirational, how do we get more kids and how do we get more people to benefit from the wonderful state of Vermont? And I think we need to do a better job in saying that those two things can exist at the same time. You know, we can do what we need to do financially to be responsible and stabilize, but we can also do what we need to do to encourage more people to come here. Because at the end of the day, we need more revenue coming in that way, because these costs are going to continue to climb. Any other comments?
I have just a quick question. I don't mean to take us back, but I just remembered a question I had while reading the tax commissioner's letter. And that was, there seemed to be a huge increase that they mentioned in, was it like retirement fund went from like 6 million to 30 million or something, and that was one of the big drivers. Brittany, is this ringing a bell?
Peter
It is for me.
Okay.
It is for me, just in terms of and Peter can probably speak to this, the legislature has been staring at the deficit within teacher retirement for a long time. I've seen that cliff coming. So we're going to see those kinds of increases with teacher retirement, I believe, year after year, because it wasn't properly funded to make do with the number of payments that they need to make.
So it's referring to pension payments, basically.
Yeah.
Problem.
It's a little more complex than that, in that the regular pension payments actually don't come out of the education fund, but some do. And what it really represents more than anything is a recalibration of the actuarial tables. You know, I think probably based on people living longer. It's not based on a whole bunch of people all of a sudden retiring, but It's on a rejigger of the actuarial tables, and there's something has to do with 7% going to 7.5% in terms of, I think, how much has to be contributed. But I think it's fair to say, as Peter pointed out, it's the new normal. Not that it's going to go up by that amount each year, but we've jumped from one level to another level of payment, and that's where that's going to be our baseline from here on out. Now it is $30 million, but we are of course talking about a $1.8 billion education fund. So it's kind of remarkable that $30 million, when you're talking about 1.8 billion, is actually very problematic.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Brittany or Peter on this one? Well, Brittany, thank you very much for sharing your perspective and information on this. And obviously, we'll be looking forward to, as this starts to paint a more specific picture than it currently does, hearing about it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So next up on the agenda, Peter, is do we have anything on the tax commissioner level letter, Peter?
No, we incorporated that into the discussion just now. The next thing is action on the SIP.
Great.
The continuous improvement plan. So I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin to give us a brief synopsis and go from there.
Super.
So the continuous improvement plan is a report that we submit to the Agency of Education every year, typically in the spring. So you've seen this report before, and usually what we do is in the spring we submit one for the district and get it approved, and then we produce one for each school. We started that process of not rewriting the SIP from scratch last year, but each year we look at the last year's goals and we look at updated data, and we think about how we're doing, and then we update the continuous improvement plan accordingly. We started that process of looking at that data in February, and so I think this is pages 27 to 23 of your packet. But then it has the SIP page numbers on it. So on page 1 of the SIP, it shows that our review date was February 6th, and then we were in the process of synthesizing that data analysis when the ground fell out from all of us. The Agency of Education gave us a sort of indefinite extension on this report, and we resurrected it in November and updated it for the COVID context. So what you should know is that the Agency of Education has already accepted and passed this continuous improvement plan for the district, but they do require us to get board approval, and so, but not necessarily before we submit it. So I did submit it and get it approved, but it's really easy to open it up and revise it if the board wants to see changes to this report. So that's the action that we're taking, is either to approve it or to recommend some change that then I would open the report in the system and make that change. This year they've said, and mind you, this is our 2020/2021 continuous improvement plan. So so it's for this year, and they've told us that for this year we don't need to submit them for each school also. I think they've decided we've produced enough reports with all of our shifting realities this year. So we will need to look at our data again this spring and update this spring. And this spring we'll need to write one for each school as well. And so you'll see these again later this year. There are a couple of big things to know. So one is that the structure is entirely the same, and a couple of you, Mary Gill and Suzanne Buck, were with us in February when we did that data dive, when we looked at that together in 208 Charles Ave, and I took the notes from that to synthesize the key findings that start on page 2. If you flip to page 2 where it says identified priority problems, each year since the AOE rolled out this format, we've been looking at our achievement gap and watching the trends and data there. And we've been looking at the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, the YRBS, as a measure of student sense of safety, belonging, and agency. So those those priority problems haven't changed. We're still really interested in those areas. The ELA key findings and the math key findings on page 5, and the safe and healthy schools key findings on, oh, I'm sorry, those were on page 2, and the safe and healthy schools key findings on page 3. Those were the findings that came from that data analysis in February. So if you look at page 3 where it says root cause analysis, this language in the first paragraph is language you've seen before, saying that here's why we think we have this gap and what we think informs students' sense of safety and belonging. But then you'll see that middle paragraph where it says, prior to the COVID-19 disruptions to learning, we understood that when we fail to meet students where they are and provide the needed supports, we make it difficult for struggling students to catch up. We saw a need for analyzing our school culture. This is taking that old language and turning the page and saying, actually, we're sort of in a different situation now. So that next paragraph says, that analysis remains valid, but both anecdotally and based on fall screening data, we know that the inequities that existed prior to COVID-19 have been exacerbated through the pandemic experience. We don't have 2020 state assessment data, but we don't need it to know that many students are struggling. And then it also talks about how, not only have students missed school, but our staffing patterns are pretty disrupted this year. We lost staff to retirements and resignations, and we reassigned them to make sure that we had enough staffing to cover remote learning. And so we have less robust systems of support than we have had in the past, because it's all hands on deck, just educating through the pandemic in providing the best tier 1 instruction that we're able to in this scenario. So this is the section of this report that says, ultimately, let's be real about where we are and set our goals accordingly. So if you flip to page 4, it says in the bottom of that top box, we can't predict the specifics of our achievement data over the next couple of years, as each individual's experience has been unique. For this reason, goals below in the same categories as previous goals have been set to a longer than usual range, looking 3 years out to repair the damage done through the COVID era, and change strategies are more immediate, aiming to strengthen our systems of support and recovery. So we're still interested in achievement and closing the achievement gap, but we still don't know whether or not we're going to be taking state tests this spring. Hasn't been officially decided. We still don't have our 2019 youth risk behavior data. I don't know why it's held up. Normally you would have gotten it in last year's strategic plan, but it hasn't been released yet. So we're still looking at 2017 YRBS data. We know they're not running the YRBS this year. So in 2021, so we have these major data pools that are just stalled out. We're way behind on our data collection. So we set the goals further out. We said, we'll still use these. So we're comparing the past to the future. We don't actually have the data on the present. And what we have in the present is the data that we produce internally, and our fast screening data and our internal assessments that we can react to in a more timely fashion. So this sets ambitious goals, really ambitious goals, of saying for ELA by 2024, we aim to have 75% of students proficient or proficient with distinction, and a data-driven district-wide intervention system will support those who continue to struggle. We haven't had 75% proficient yet. So that's an ambitious goal, but that second part is really important. This speaks to the work that Vicki has been leading with the systems of support, right? So this idea is, as we emerge back out of the pandemic and continue that system of services design team work, we're really putting those data-driven systems in place so that we're aiming for higher achievement for all, both in ELA, that's goal 1, and in math, which is goal 2. And you'll see goal 3 still looks at the YRBS data, but it takes a guess that we'll get data for 2022 and 2024. And you'll see that for the first time ever, we have baseline data for our internal equity audit, which we ran in 2019 and would need to run again this spring in 2021 to compare that data. That equity audit that we do internally, we do it at the secondary level as well, but at the elementary level, it sort of stands in for the YRBS because that's just a middle school and high school survey. So that's the premise of this report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Caitlin, could you talk a little bit about, given what 2019 showed from an ELA perspective, let's take, for example, and then the goal of having a 75% proficient rate in a 3-year time, could you talk a little bit about your thinking with regards to milestones so that we'll know we're trending in the right direction? Is there an assumption that it's going to take a couple of years to see a significant impact, or is there an assumption that we will see steady growth over a period of time, or how are you thinking about solving that problem?
So I think it's a really interesting question, and to be honest, 75% is a little bit of an arbitrary number. It's ambitious on purpose, but noting that the last year for which we have data is 2019. There were no tests in 2020, and we don't know if there will be tests in 2021. So we will, come out of 2022. I would fully anticipate that we're back into a full testing season, and that might be the first time that we get to see what 2 very disrupted school years did after several months of then being back in session. So I think that we, in the short term, we've got, as I mentioned, our local data. The FAST and the STAR assessments are reliable assessments, and we're going to need to lean into those more heavily than we have probably. But then that global SBAC data will come later. And so I think we'll have a much better sense based on the next testing season, where we stand and can calibrate the goals accordingly. Other questions?
Mary Gill?
Caitlin, where is our baseline right now as of 2019? It's my understanding that we were probably more in the 50% proficient.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yep. So if I look at the ELA scores, they ranged in terms of proficient and proficient with distinction. The lowest was 49% and the highest was 69%. And those are by grade level.
Right. And that's ELA.
That's ELA.
Math,
I've got the math here too. So the math in 2019, our lowest was 41% and our highest was 65%. It's interesting, our scale is small enough that those numbers are pretty volatile. When you have a much bigger sample size, they hold a bit steadier. It's hard to, for those people who were in there looking at the data over time, it can be hard to pick out the patterns. And on page 2, where you see ELA key findings and math key findings, you can see we looked to capture, what feels important in our 2019 data, what do we see in terms of trends over time, and what do we know about equity based on this data. So those are based on small group conversations looking at this data, the patterns that we were seeing and sort of leaning into for analysis. And we'll continue that process of looking at the data for those sort of patterns that can tell us how we're doing.
Chip?
Yeah, in the real world, this gives us sort of year to year, but because of COVID, we're going to see this giant hole. And I presume as you collect the data in whatever way we collect it, this will be one of the other measures of the damage, so to speak, that COVID has done to the system as far as learning goes. I mean, we can be as aggressive as we can and try to be as good as we can, but there's just no way that this isn't going to set every statistic back in some way, I would expect. And I don't know whether it's helpful knowing that or whether it's just another piece that we'll put together when this is sort of in a couple of years when it's whatever normal we're back to, but it'll show where we have to get to that's very different than what we thought we had to get to a few years ago.
Amy?
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna, I'm appreciating, I'm viewing this in the long view in terms of this is our baseline as we really try to set out to address equity. And yeah, we're gonna have the bumps from the COVID but at least we're seeing some trends. But I'm appreciating that we also now have the affective data as our baseline for the elementary in addition to the secondary, so that as we do move to consolidation, we'll be able to see, the effect of, because we're believing that it's going to be good for kids, but I'm hopeful that this data will demonstrate that once we start moving kids around. Just noting that.
Yeah, and this pulls out very few items from each of those instruments, the YRBS and the equity audit. We have much more data at our fingertips that would open itself up to a deeper dive. This report is very much just a synthesis, a summary of some of the important things that we see. It's certainly not all of the data or all of the work that we're doing.
Caitlin, one of the things I think you see nationally in this discussion of learning loss caused by COVID is that we as a system of schools have continually demonstrated our struggle with addressing achievement gaps. Mm-hmm. Like we haven't cracked that nut yet. And so now we have this whole other thing that has created a whole other reason why the achievement gap is growing, and bringing the same tools to solve that problem that we haven't been able to solve in the past seems a little bit like, pretty obvious that's not going to work out well. And so it'll be interesting, I think, for me, it'll be interesting to see, here's how we're thinking differently about this, because we got to bring a different tool to the situation, or else why should we expect a different outcome? And now the fact that more kids are being affected in a more significant way, I think should cause us to really take a step back and ensure that we're doing everything that we can to provide the appropriate resources. Which is why I felt it was incredibly important for us not to stall the things that we need to do from a financial perspective to stabilize. But I call on you and your team to help us really understand what's going to look different, because we got to start. I think we have to start demonstrating and thinking about that and communicating that, because this is going to have a significant. I mean, New York City has stated they're testing every single one of their kids now with a low stake test to try to measure in some way what those million kids are going through as a result of this. Like, it's that significant to make that type of commitment. So I'm going to be interested to understand how we're thinking about this moving forward. Any other questions or comments for Caitlin?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that a little bit, and I wondered, Caitlin, if there's any, if you've heard of any talk, even at the state level, about doing a similar thing to what Mary was talking about, in analyzing the learning loss sort of across the state. Has there been any discussion about? I mean, I assume not, since you're not even sure if they're going to do the standardized testing for this year, but maybe if there's discussion at the state level. And then second part of my question is, at the district level, are you looking to the FAST tests and what other tests that you use currently to sort of fill that gap in data so that you can see, if we are trending in the right way, or just exactly how COVID has impacted learning loss?
So you had two questions. I haven't heard a state level plan to assess learning loss. It doesn't mean it's not happening. I haven't heard it. Peter and Vicki, have you heard any references to that?
I haven't heard anything, and I honestly would doubt that the state would be taking that on. I think it's going to probably fall to individual districts just given other things.
And then the second one was about how are we using our data. So it's interesting, at this point, we're largely using the FAST data at the classroom and at the school level. And we haven't stepped back and done a analysis of it at the district level, but I think that's warranted for sure. I think that anecdotally, we're seeing a pattern here that I think resonates across the country. There was a report that came out recently that was, expressing surprise that there seemed to be less of a dip than expected in literacy scores. Math seemed to be lagging a little bit, but less worrisome than you might have thought, except that the worrisome trend was all of the missing data from students who might be struggling, right? And so we're finding that we're missing some of our data for students who haven't attended and missed an opportunity for a FAST assessment. So we're really looking, and maybe we do I should let Vicki speak to the FAST in terms of, we have multiple windows of FAST testing, and we're looking to the next one. Vicki, is the next one in January, the next FAST testing window?
It's in January, and the FAST is utilized as a screener to check to see kind of where kids are and where the gaps might be and where there's some regression. But it's utilized as a screener, again, just to kind of get a sense of where kids are. So we do fall, usually within the first 6 weeks of school. There's a 4-week window. January 11th, it's open for another 4-week window, and then May 15th, it's open for a 4-week window.
And Vicki, just is it predictive, statistically predictive of the SBAC? Or has there been any correlations between those two instruments, or no?
I don't know if there have been correlations between the two, but it's a point in time. It's kind of like, checking your oil. It's a just that one point in time, unless and until you use it also for progress monitoring to see, that one point in time, and then if you're providing an intervention, to see how that student is doing on the intervention.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? So I think from an action perspective though, Caitlin, you need us to vote as a board on approval of this SIP.
I do.
Great. Could I have a motion then, please? Everyone who's raising your hand, you're also mute.
Mary, I'll move it. I'll second.
Suzanne Buck has moved it, and Amy has seconded it. All those in favor say aye by showing your hands. Any opposed? Great, so moved. Caitlin, thank you very much for presenting this, and we look forward to the continued discussion.
Thank you.
So next on our agenda is the Middlebury Parks and Recreation.
Okay, I'm inviting Karen Duguay over, who is our representative on that board.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Karen. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I got the dates mixed up in my calendar and tried to log in the next night. So I'm sorry for wasting everyone's time. But here I am, and unfortunately I don't have a whole lot to share with you, but I would be glad to share what I can and then get your any feedback that you want me to take back to the committee. We actually have not had a meeting since March, so that is being planned for not too far in the future. So currently there are no programming things happening at Parks and Rec. So that's because of the governor restrictions. We have begun preliminary discussions with Mesa about a new digital sign that would go in front of Middlebury Rec Park and the Mary Hogan driveway. So those conversations are happening. That's something that was built into Parks and Rec budget. So it's something that we would be able to move on if the school decides that it's something that they want to have happen. We had 141 kids play soccer this fall, which is 50% of the normal amount. But it was great to be able to do some sort of program. The kids did not play against other schools. They just played scrimmages against their own teams. But it was a way to feel normal, which was really nice. And the kids that played, I think, really enjoyed it. So it was great that Parks and Rec was able to adapt and do something, some variation of the soccer program. And then the last thing was that they did a learning camp during hybrid on Wednesdays. And that was something that they found to be pretty successful, and they are ready to do that again should the need arise. So at any given point, they'd be ready to jump back to that. So that's all I have. Not very much to share, unfortunately, but I would love to take your comments or questions if you have anything for me to take back to the committee. Chip.
Can you define what a learning camp is? Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, so they did. Yep. So they so it was for kids. It was basically like kind of like what an after school program would be like. And so small pods, masked with social distancing, but they were able to offer some programming on those Wednesdays for small groups of kids. And they actually, one of the programs that they did was they stuffed bags of candy for Spectacular, the drive-through trick-or-treating. I may have lost a little bit of candy in that endeavor, but it was really helpful. So they were just looking for ways to, keep the kids busy and having fun. So those are the kinds of things that they were doing.
Karen, how many kids participated in that Wednesday program? Do you know?
I have to find out from Dustin. It was different week to week. I know that the kids that were participating when I was dropping candy off, it was groups of, I think, 8. So I'll find out what the total is, Mary, and let you know.
Great. Any other questions for Karen? Karen, thank you very much. And we look forward to a time when your next update is filled with an amazing number of activities that kids are.
Me too. Oh, I hope soon. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you for your work.
Great. So next up on the agenda is a discussion for the facilities master plan. And with that, I'll turn it over to Victoria.
Great, thank you. If I disappear, I do keep getting a notice that my connection is unstable. So wave or something, stick your tongue out if I'm not coming through clearly. So we had discussed, we met, the facilities committee met last week, and we have David here, who I'll introduce in just a minute. Before we get to that, I just wanted to talk about, we had talked about bringing a timeline to the full board as a schedule of the work and board discussions and decisions that need to happen or that we're scheduling to happen between now and the final, and when the final plan is done. Peter and I have worked a little bit on it, and we are going to have a facilities meeting, I'm hoping on Wednesday, to go over it and confirm sort of the schedule and the process. So before I make it public and bring it to all of you, I want the facilities committee to have a look at it. So you all will see sort of the plan as we see it going forward on Monday. But just to give you sort of an idea, it'll include things like next Monday's board meeting, which I didn't have on my calendar till today. Just a reminder that it's on Monday the 21st and not the 28th. I see Jen Newseder may have made the same mistake. So at that meeting, we're going to go over school choice with a presentation, hopefully in the beginning of January. We haven't confirmed yet with Tim, but there'll be presentation and discussion on the transportation study. And then later on in January, we'll have some meetings where we have to take action, voting on various things like how we want the bond issue to be presented in the facilities master plan, that sort of thing. So once the facilities meeting or committee meets, we'll have sort of more information on that going forward. I don't know, Peter, do you want to add anything to that here?
No, I think that's good. I mean, we've, over the years, we've had probably 3 or 4 timelines, which continue to get, shifted and changed based on our understanding of the process. And I think as we continue to engage, so I think it's at a point now where it would be really helpful to look at some of the final pieces, that you all have talked about for quite a long time, and think about how to summarize that work, when to talk about it. There's obviously a lot going on with budget and everything else. So I think the clearer it is, I think it's better for everyone, and especially for the public in terms of understanding kind of how the tail end of this process looks and how to engage, etc.
Great. So then at the facilities meeting, we had David Epstein come. Tim continues to work on the transportation analysis. So we had David come to help us sort of think through some of the other aspects of the facilities master plan, and what we've said, sort of the strategies the things that we've said we're going to strategize about within the plan. So he is here tonight to basically share with the full board what he shared with the facilities committee around bonding, and sort of what the process for that looks like, what the timeline for that looks like. And then we'll have a discussion on and answer questions about that. And then investment in our secondary buildings, and what that looks like. And then finally, we'll have a discussion about sustainability. That was one of the things that was a guiding principle when we all made our guiding principles. And so it feels appropriate to come back to that and sort of define what does that mean, and what does that mean within the context of the facilities master plan, of renovation as well as new construction, etc. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to David.
Thank you, Victoria. Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone again. So I was asked to take a look at some of, as we're sort of trying to wrap up the facilities master plan, one of the things we hadn't looked at was the look ahead schedule, in terms of, okay, so the board considers the master plan and presumably moves forward, then what? What does the timeline look like, and what are the different steps that happen after that point? And as Victoria said, we'll talk a little bit about the middle school and the high school, and then finally talk about sustainability. So I'm going to share my screen if I'm allowed to do that. And this is the schedule. Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yep.
Good. I see a thumbs up. Thank you, Peter. So right now we talked about thinking about the after the master plan is completed, about the different phases that might happen afterwards, in 3 different phases. First was stabilization. Then the second was planning for the future. And then the third phase was the investment in the facilities. And so this schedule is divided into those 3 phases, with at the top where it says FMP is the facilities master plan. So that's been going on for quite a while, as everybody knows. And my understanding is that, the facilities committee would like to bring it to completion in early next year, February or March, or at least bring it to a point where there's a robust conversation about finalizing it. And assuming it goes forward, and there's a lot of assumptions built into the schedule, then we're in what the facilities committee is calling the stabilization period. And the planning would begin for the reorganization or consolidation, depending on what you want to call it, that would begin right away. But the feeling was that none of that could take place until probably fall of 2022 at the earliest. And so these blue bars on the schedule are school years. So this would be year one, the first bar, year two, year three, year four, each bar. And so that's one data point, or one milestone, is that year one of the consolidation during that time period. And one of the ideas you'll see here is this: identify low cost, high impact improvements, this green bar. The idea was, what we talked about is that some of the schools may need some work to prepare for the changes that are about to come. And so we talked about, could we identify low cost, high impact improvements? And then you might, depending on the scale of those improvements, you might do those in the summer of 2022 before the consolidation happens. Then the committee felt that, it would be really good to have a year of this new normal under its belt to before starting planning for the investments that would go into districts. And I think one of the baseline things that you're hearing in the way I'm describing this is that the facilities committee and the master plan recognizes the need to reinvest in the facilities that remain in the district. That they've been, everybody's doing the best that they've been able to do given the current funding realities, but the buildings need a lot of work, and that part of the savings from this consolidation should be used for reinvestment in the facilities. And one of the things I wanted to talk about relative to that is that the board's considering a 3-school versus a 4-school option, and there's no question that strictly from a facility standpoint, it's more expensive to go with a 4-school option, because now you've got 4 schools that you have to invest in as opposed to 3. Probably in the in the range of 3 to 10 million would be a range I would put, just in terms of the different 3 to 4 schools. But nonetheless, the feeling was that there would be this period of just kind of getting your feet underneath you in the year one of the consolidation, and then in year two would be when the district-wide facility improvement plans would start to be investigated. And in that case, you'd have to hire an architect-led team. There'd be engineers on the team, and it would be a pretty, you'd probably be looking across the whole district, coming up with a master plan in terms of specific facility improvements, and then coming up with an idea of how to phase those, or is it going to be done, because there's always when you do these projects, there's always more things to do than you can afford, so you have to prioritize and you have to decide what stuff gets first. And there's a little bit of a shell game in terms of whenever you're building, when you're renovating a school, you have to find, if the renovation takes longer than a summer, then you have to find what we call swing space. You have to find places to move kids while work is being done. Now, the range of that work, we've tried to bookend that range, and the range in terms of the scope of that work could be anywhere from just tackling deferred maintenance at the buildings to, if everybody recalls, we developed a program for what we called a model school. And this is, when we say the model school, this is not like Shangri-La. This is just saying a school with an art room and a music room, a school with a full-size elementary school gym like Salisbury and Mary Hogan have, school with space for support services. So the bookend is, on one end is just tackling deferred maintenance and not really addressing any renovations to the school that change its configuration or add space, to creating 3 or 4 model schools, another 3 or 4 schools that are all well appointed in terms of their amenities. And I think something to think about is the equity piece. Yes, you could deliver a quality art program in a school that has an art room and a school that doesn't have an art room, but it's a lot harder in a school that doesn't have those kinds of support facilities. So it is the facilities piece is an equity piece, but this planning, right now, no decisions have to be made about what is that scope. I mean, now one thing the board could do is they could state their intentions in the facilities master plan about what the vision is for a 3-school or a 4-school elementary in terms of the elementary level. And then once you get to this point of the planning, at least the intention will be embodied in the facilities master plan. Typically when you're doing planning for a fairly large project, it takes about a school year to kind of work out what all the options are and cost things out. Just to give you a sense of scale on this, the deferred maintenance piece, and we have good data for the elementary schools because we did facility evaluations for those. That would be about 15 million for those 4 schools in the time period of like 2026. And if you were to do the model school piece, it would be more like 40 million. So just kind of I was talking about bookends. Those are the two, that's the range for the elementary school. When you get to the high school and the middle school, we don't have the same kind of granular data, but the middle school, according to Bruce McIntyre, is in pretty good shape. It's not, there's no major projects that it needs. But the high school is a different story. The high school was built in the 50s, was added in the 60s. There was all these different additions. Some of the systems are quite old. The kitchen is original. For example, we did a project in Williston, a similar size project, similar age, where it was pretty much a renovation, but we replaced windows and we replaced the HVAC system and aspects of the electrical system. And that was about a $20 million project. In 2026 dollars, that's about a $30 million project because that was done in 2015. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I'm just trying to give you a range. Like, these are not $3 million, $4 million projects. To tackle, let's say, the high school is probably a 30 million at least project. And the elementary schools are 15 to 40. So these are the kinds of scale of projects that you could be faced with. And granted, like I said, you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it in phases, but I just don't want people to think that, if we spend a couple of $1 million, we'll take care of things. Now, unfortunately, right now there is no school construction aid from the state of Vermont. A group of us have been working pretty hard to try and get a program reinstated, but and we were actually getting some traction, but then COVID hit, and attention was elsewhere, as it should have been, regarding facilities and construction funding. So that's the current state. So let's continue to walk through the schedule here. So there's this planning phase in here, and ultimately that would lead to a bond vote. the bond vote right now in this schedule would be 2025. And then if that was to be successful on the first time, which is always a question, then what happens is the design team has to do now the detailed design. So the blueprints, as they are, or the technical documents that are used for permitting, bidding, construction, and that, you know, that also could take 8 to 12 months. So in a scenario like this, you might start construction in 2026 out here. Now there are ways to, if you know, obviously there's clearly ways to push that out further, but you could start if you sat there and said, you know, that's too long. We don't want to wait 6 years. You could move the green bars forward 1 year and start the planning during year 1. You know, so there is some flexibility that way, but that's a this particular schedule is based on our conversations. So I think that I'm just looking through my notes here. Yeah, so that let me stop there and just ask if there's any questions about the schedule as I've presented it.
David, and I just want to make clear that for folks watching and for documentation of this meeting, this is a proposed schedule. We haven't in any way confirmed. I know we've talked about when reorganization would take place and whether or not that's 2022 or 2023. I don't want it out there that some decision has been made that it's 2022 because people are looking at a timeline right now. And so I just want to make sure, and Victoria, if you can confirm that from a facilities committee perspective, that that's in line with what you're thinking as well, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. This is just, as David said, you know, that bar of first year can be moved out. This is just an exercise to sort of begin the discussion of, you know, if we vote on the, say, 4-school plan, what then does the future hold?
And how does that extrapolate out basically?
How does that extrapolate out? And so it may seem like, well, you know, how do we start thinking about a bond now? Well, let's remember that the facilities master plan is a 10-year plan. And so, and if you talk to Bruce McIntyre, he says, you know, some of the major systems at the high school, some are on their last legs and some will be on their last legs in the next few years. And so I think it behooves us to start sort of mentally preparing for the concept of going out for a bond and understanding what does that process look like and what is that. So that's what this is. This is not anything that we voted on. It's not set in stone. It's just an exercise to get people thinking about what the schedule may look like.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, we use these.
Sorry.
I just wanted to comment and say that, yeah, this really captured the conversation that we had prior to the facilities committee meeting, and it's really just a graphic way to be able to understand and talk about the schedule and at the same time understand what are the, you know, some of the pieces are connected together, but others can move, and it really is a working tool for the facility committee and the board to think about and discuss, you know, what makes the most sense for the district.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think it's a complex process, and I think this is helpful for this board, future boards, to understand the process for one, and then two, at the time that the board begins to really look at it after the stabilization phase and there's a planning phase, that's a time where you're looking at, you know, where are we in terms of post-COVID ed fund, and where's the state in terms of capital investment, and what do we feel like is the will of our community in terms of how much they want to invest. So that future group is going to be looking at all those factors and making a determination around, can we take care of all the issues that we have? Do we need to think about this over a 5-year period? That kind of thing. So I think it's pretty important, and it's I think, as everyone said, it's certainly none of it's set in stone, but having an understanding of the framework and the process will be important.
Right. I would just reiterate that the plan itself is not going to be a plan that says, in December of 2025, we'll go out for a $40 million bond, but rather it's going to set the structure for, however much time after we consolidate, then we need to enter into the planning phase, which will consist of talking about a bond, evaluating the financial environment, understanding whether or not we can get state help, analyzing the buildings to see how much we're actually talking about. So the facilities master plan will give the structure to that, but not the sort of minutia. Chip?
Back in whenever it was when we had our last meetings and we sort of decided between, I think, the 5 choices that we sort of had on the table at that point. That was back in, I think, March or February. A no bond situation sort of eliminated the idea of 2 large schools, Mary Hogan and one on the west, which would have required a bond to build an entirely new school. I don't want people to think that going forward you can't do capital projects without some sort of bonding. They're just too big. You can't work them into your budgets, even if it's for major deferred maintenance. And we had that discussion at the meeting the other day because I was sort of questioning that issue of bonding, and it become obvious that this is real. And by planning this way, it's not a case to scare people. It's not a case to throw it up and put out these big numbers, but it's to say, again, that the status quo can't exist, but the status quo, even with some major changes, is expensive. Even if there's savings on one side, there are major expenses that are going to come along the way, no matter how we would like it to be otherwise. So at least that's how I take it anyway.
Other comments or questions for David?
Yeah, I do want to just finish up with the just a brief discussion on sustainability.
But before we get to that, I also think it's important as we think about those low cost, high impact investments, in light of the conversation that Brittany had with us in the beginning, that some of those would be accomplished through the use of the reserve funds, and we're going to have to be thinking about our decisions because they will affect then what those low cost, high impact things could be, because there will still be some cost and we will need access to some funds to pay for them.
Absolutely. So just to finish up, I just wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability. Back in August of 2019, when we did the visioning workshop with the board affirmed that the ACSD approach to school facilities should demonstrate a commitment to sustainability with good fresh air, ventilation, and access to natural light. And so in the master plan, the board has an opportunity to sort of talk about what the intention is moving forward with in terms of sustainability and planning. Now, sustainability has, is typically referring to, energy usage and water and other resource efficiencies. At a district planning
Get the
level,
whole nail kit.
the
Did you turn the light on?
there's certainly environmental impacts, like the transportation and energy costs. I mean, I think just reducing the number of buildings, and you're creating a more sustainable approach. So I think this, but when you get to at a building level, there's some options in terms of there's several green building rating systems you could consider. Like, I don't know if people have heard of LEED, which is Leadership in Environment and Energy Design, Energy and Environmental Design, and CHIPS, which is a collaborative for high performance schools, which is very similar. Another way would be to consider building, when you renovate a school, trying to create net zero energy schools. So that's a building that produces as much energy as it uses. It's interesting, the Vermont Energy, the Commercial Building Energy Standards, we call it CBs, Vermont CBs. It's updated every 3 years, and it's on a very aggressive timeline to require net zero energy buildings by 2030, which is pretty, 10 years away. Now, when you're renovating a building, it's not necessarily going to make you have to make the building, but if you're building new, it's a different story. Or if you're doing a big addition, it's a different story. But it's just to say that, like, this is the way the code is going. This is the way we're building now at a very high level. Ideally, this commitment would be at least discussed in the master plan and kind of fleshed out a little bit about what the intention is. And one of the things that we've seen is that, in terms of when you do go for a bond vote and you do start to discuss reinvestment in your facilities, this is something that's just really important to people and really helps people get behind a project if they know that it's being planned with sustainability in mind. And it, in the end, so what happens is when you do design in this, when you do sustainable design, you don't look at first cost, you look at life cycle costs of owning things. So, and that's really ideal for a school district because, you're going to own these buildings for a long time. So, if you look at just, okay, what's the cost to put like a certain kind of flooring down, that misses the point in terms of what's the cost to own and operate it. You have to strip and wax it every year. Is the maintenance, what's the maintenance like? How long does it last? And so, so that's one of the things when you do integrated design or sustainable design is that you're always looking at life cycle costs of everything. And in the long run, there's a return on investment. So there's a lot of wins with approaching building this way, but it does require a commitment. And it really is more apropos. I think it has more teeth and more traction at the building level. And I think, so anyway, at the facilities master plan, in the facilities master plan, there's an opportunity to say a little bit more than what's in the guiding principles in terms of what the goals are, as to embed those values, so that the when the planning does start, there's some guidance. Any questions on that?
Amy?
It's more a question for Victoria. Thanks, David, which is how do we envision that being articulated in the plan? I mean, is it just about a statement of values, or are there some projections of what we would like to do, or just how are we envisioning that being part of the plan that we'd be voting on? Because I completely agree that it's an important, I mean, yeah, we named it as a value, but it's also, if we're going to think about construction at all, we can't not think about the energy impact and moving forward. And not that they're in a position to help in a lot of ways, but, we do have a college that is in our proximity that, has a whole Energy 2028 plan that is very ambitious. And I'm sure that there's some things that we can draw from that can serve our purposes as well. But I'm just curious what you were thinking, Victoria, as chair of the committee or members of the committee.
Well, I think that this is other than our founding principles, we've talked about it. We haven't spoken specifically about like where it's going to be in the plan. I do think that the idea of having it sort of upfront as the guiding principle. And then when we get into the details of each section, I think I can't speak specifically at this point, like how we would weave that in, but I anticipate when appropriate, it would be sort of woven throughout. But I would love to hear from the board, how they, if they have ideas on how they think that should be presented.
Any other comments? The one thing, and I would ask this of David and of you, Peter Burrows, I struggle to envision a time where states are going to have the financial resources to support the capital issues that our schools are facing across the country. And I really think that this is an opportunity for us to say at the federal level and lobby and advocate for the federal government to consider our schools as national infrastructure. And so when we are looking at times for stimulus during recession or shovel-ready projects to stimulate our national economy, schools need to be on the table as being seen as national infrastructure, and then that federal dollars could be invested in those. So whatever you can do in your own lobbying efforts, whether it's the Superintendent's Association at the national level, or David, your lobbying efforts from an industry perspective, we need to change the dialogue so that schools are seen as a national infrastructure. And I will support and do whatever I can through other relationships to get that message out there, because it is not going to happen at the state level.
I think you're spot on. David's mentioned the work that he's done with the Superintendent's Association to work with the legislature. But like you said, if you look at where the ed fund is and where it's headed,
Not going to happen.
it's not going to happen. I think you're right. I think the federal level is where there could be some movement.
Any other comments or questions on this? Chip?
Just one comment relative to the sort of generality of some of this, of the report, sort of the question you asked to Victoria. Looking at this time frame, which is extremely broad, but it does go out quite a ways. So there's quite a few members of this particular board who aren't going to be on that board when we get out a few years. So making it a guidepost to me is the most important, because each succeeding board, whoever makes up those people that are making the decisions about, sustainability or whatever, will at least have the guidepost of a general master plan, but the specifics themselves are going to be decided at each step. So I think it's good to put it in there, but there's going to be different people on this school board each year. And that's going to have to reconcile with how we go forward.
Mary Gill.
Speaking to that, is there, I know when we were starting the whole master plan, facilities plan, we incorporated the community partnership in a big way as leaders in their community or spokesperson for their communities to start building up support. Is there some way we can incorporate that again? And, you know, they've been so helpful trying to make this COVID recovery. I mean, I'm just always impressed on everything that they're doing, but I think the more we get the community partnership people involved, there'll be more, you know, spreading the word through their communities of what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, get their input, what they feel is important. And I think we'll start building more support through that. It's just a thought.
Other comments or questions? So Victoria, do you have anything else from a facilities perspective?
I think that's it. Peter, did I miss anything that we wanted to cover?
I don't think so. I think the bonding and sustainability were the two ones that we wanted to bring forward. So it's helpful. I think we're set.
Great, thank you very much. So folks, the next item on the agenda is other, and we do have a couple of things under other that I'd like to bring to the table. I know that you have received, and it has been shared, that one of our communities has made it, or part of our community has made it official that they are going to be going down the process of requesting to secede from ACSD, and that is Ripton. And we've received questions from the Addison Independent and John Flowers as to what the ACSD leadership thinks about the request of Ripton. And while Peter has responded to some of the specifics of process, I did not feel I had it was my place to respond to John on behalf of the board, because as a board, we have not specifically discussed, since it has just been made official, the request of secession for Ripton. And so I wanted us to have that discussion as a board. This is one of those discussions which I wish we were in person for. And so we're going to try to do this the best that we can virtually. And I also wanted to kind of kick it off, and then we'll ask you all to share your thoughts. It's not often that I write things down in something like this, but I did want to make sure that I was succinct, and so I did that. But as a member of this board, I believe that I serve as the Weybridge representative, but to act on behalf of all students of ACSD. I bring my perspective, my context, my opinions, but I do so in service of all students. And I deeply understand the perspective of those that reside within towns that are currently under consideration for closure. And I understand the desire of some to act in a way that they feel is in the best interest of their community and their children. You know, that being said, I also really believe that our community should not be defining itself by borders or street addresses. And I believe we should define ourselves by those who participate in and contribute to the learning community of ACSD. And I truly believe being part of this community is an incredible opportunity for those who have access. And while today there are some of those who believe it is in the best interest of their families and community to keep the elementary schools in question open and do so at any cost, I have to say I disagree here. By placing this financial requirement on this system, all our schools will deteriorate, in my opinion. And in a few years, when today's elementary school children are ready to attend MUMs or MUHS, those will be different schools. They will reflect the cost of operating more elementary schools than are necessary to support all our kids. And while consolidating our elementary schools is not going to alleviate all our challenges, as we have clearly discussed tonight, not doing so will increase them. But most importantly, I believe that our final recommendation as a board will be driven by our desire to do what's best for kids, all kids. And so at this time, I really like to ask all our board members tonight to share your thoughts on the actions submitted by Ripton as they have shared their decision to begin the process of secession from ACSD. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the board. If you could just raise your Zoom hand with any of your thoughts, and then we'll go from there. Jen Newceder.
I apologize for my unmiking earlier when I was
No worries.
my son to go read. He's been waiting for me to read with him. I must have tapped by accident. Thanks for putting that together. It was really eloquent as expected from you. And I haven't wrapped my head around even a response. I guess I just want to share that I'm sad. You know, we work so hard, and this work has been so challenging over the past few years, and we know that it's hard for the community as well. And like you said, we know that in our hearts, and how we can keep coming to these meetings every week and hear these criticisms of our work, because we know that at its root, we're working toward a viable solution that's best for the students and best for the community. And so I feel like a strong school district is what's going to drive people to move here, not a school in a town. That's my personal opinion. I spoke to somebody at IPJ Realty just last week about this, and she agreed. And I think she knows what she's talking about from the real estate perspective. My mom was a realtor, and I remember her all my life saying, good school system, good school system. She never once said good school or good school in my community or my town. So I feel like what we need is a good school system, and we're working toward that. And I'm sad that that there are people who feel like we're not doing our job well enough, that they need to leave this work. So hopefully in the future we can, work this out.
Mary Gill, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wondered how many voters from Ripton were required to petition to have this put on the ballot. Is there a number of people they had to get signatures from, or just wonder what the full flavor of the community is? Is it just an activist group, or is it more?
You need to get 5% of registered voters in order to
5%.
petition. Yeah.
Okay.
And, I think I would caution us from debating that. I mean, it's a done deal. This petition's been
I understand.
presented.
The other thing is, I think we keep hearing from the different communities that when they, present to us at the beginning of our board meeting, that they're waiting for some kind of dialogue to come back on some of their questions. And I know through the porch conversations, there's been a lot of work done that way, and various written columns in the paper, et cetera. But obviously, we're not having the dialogue that's having a positive effect for that community and possibly one or two others who are probably also feeling the same way. I think we have to, I don't know what to say, but I think we have to continue to have conversations with them and continue to bring them into, to this whole communication. I think we're seeing that across the country too. We're not necessarily listening to each other, and there's so much divide. So I just would like us to continue communicating and talking with them, and, you know, trying to come to some common understanding of where they're at the table. Most of our conversations happen amongst ourselves. So I'm just putting that out there. I think we need to have more open communication.
Amy?
I'm just going to respond. I don't even know where to begin in the broader question, and I really do want to hear from everyone else, but I did want to just address your point, Mary, which is, so there's an activist group that obviously, you know, has been the Save Our Schools group that's been leading the effort, but I would not interpret that to mean that, I mean, we haven't voted on it yet. So my main concern is to make sure that the information that, well, there are about 400 some registered voters in Ripon. I want to reach not the Save Our Schools folks because we've been in dialogue or we've been trying to listen to each other, but it's all the other people who don't have the information and who should vote on this and make an informed decision, and to make sure that they have the right information about what's going to happen once, you know, where the sixth grader is going to go, and what are going to be the cost per pupil, what's going to be the budget, where's the governance going to be assigned in terms of a supervisory union, because they're not going to stay within all of those kinds of questions that are not even addressed yet. So I'm hoping once we get through this that we do talk about what information needs to get generated and how we get it out, or if we charge our committee with that or whatever.
Right.
Because there's a lot of information that is not out there yet.
Exactly. And when I looked at the legal advice that Peter had sent along with that, it does seem like, does everybody understand what this means? That's why I really feel like the rest of the voters have to be really well informed on what's out there, because I didn't understand it until I read through that, and it's pretty significant.
Peter Conlon?
Yeah, following up on Amy's comment, you know, the information that we have that's very clear is that if this process starts and completes to fruition, all ties with ACSD are severed. And if I were a member of Ripon or any other community that's thinking about this, it would prompt a lot of questions in my mind that I'm not sure we can necessarily answer right now, but I'm not even sure that the burden is ours to answer them. We're not the ones pushing this. You know, I think people are going to want to know what's the financial impact? What becomes of the 712 student base? What becomes of the staff? The staff works under an ACSD contract. What about busing? I mean, there's just, it brings up so many questions that I would assume people would want answers to. You know, how do you provide those classes that are 1 day a week? How do you hire people for 1 day a week? You know, I think probably one of the biggest issues in something like this is how do you deal with special education? If you're on your own, you're also on your own for special education costs and special education services. And, you know, these are all issues that are the reason we came together as a unified district to solve them. And I think we have. And I think that the question, you know, I think that these are answers that the folks who are encouraging this are going to have the burden to answer. And I think that if we're going to take a position on this, I think the position should be, these are significant challenges. These are the challenges that brought us together as a unified district. But that the reality of trying to solve them solo is very daunting.
Chip?
Yeah, Peter and Amy both said what I was thinking right along. I guess I have one question relative to if, in fact, the town in their vote in January decides not to secede, or at least proceed with secession. Number one, do they have other alternatives? And the other side of it is if they do vote to secede, from what I understand from the written document is legally, is that all other schools or towns in our supervisor or in our district have to vote positively. So if all the other towns vote or do not vote to allow Ripton to secede, are there other alternatives, so to speak? Where does it put ACSD, and what risk is it, other than what we've already talked about legally, as to our structure with or without Ripton? What risks does it put to us? Irrespective of the children, which I'm totally supportive of everybody's comments, it's just not the way I would want to see a town go. But I worry about just the instability of having those kinds of secession. I mean, it just doesn't help a system at all.
Other comments or questions? I do think, you know, there are, I feel as a steward that we do have a responsibility to ensure that the right questions are being asked and that we help in formulating from our perspective what the answers to some of those questions are to the best of our ability at this time. You know, we don't know all of the answers to the complexity of what it would mean for Ripton to secede, but you know, what does that mean from if a town was to secede from an IB perspective in that curriculum? Are they no longer an IB elementary school, and is there then the assumption that those kids are going to come into MUMS in the high school, which is an IB program, and what will that do to a child's learning path and learning proficiencies and alignment from a curriculum perspective? To the question of staffing, I don't know what the contract means and the implications of that. Can we provide some clarity around, are these teachers, are they teachers that are ACSD employees, and if a community decides to secede, do those teachers, are they still under a contract that they're able to then, from a longevity perspective, does that impact other teachers? Like those types of questions, I think we need to have some understanding of collectively as a community as we go through this, because you know, now's when we need to come together to help think about this, not go further apart.
Do you think maybe the communications committee should prepare like an FAQ type thing? Mary, how would you envision moving forward on that front?
Yeah, I do. I think,
and that's to say, I know it's not necessarily our responsibility. We didn't start the process, but I do think that it's our responsibility to that community to make sure that they have the right information in making the decisions that are in front of them.
Absolutely. And this is a decision that is not just, as we all know, is not just going to affect the kids that are going to elementary school right now. This is going to affect a whole broader set that I think we need to make sure, to the best of our ability, that everyone is as informed as possible. So I do see as an FAQ or some type of Q&A that helps folks understand this it's from our perspective, like anything else.
We may not have the answer though, but we do have the obligation to ask the question of the community. Do you know what this will do? Do you know how much this will cost? I think those are questions. We can't necessarily answer it, but I agree with Peter Conlon that it's not our role to provide the answers, but certainly it's to provide the questions, which I would hope would not make this a simplistic decision that the community makes.
Right, but at the same time, it may not be, you know, our responsibility, but I'd rather, I think we have the ability and an understanding of what the true costs will be and that sort of thing. And not everybody in that community has access to that. Or potentially the numbers that they're hearing maybe are misguided or that aren't considering all the information. And so I do think that we need to go a little beyond just making sure they're asking the right questions, but actually, helping with some of the information gathering. And Amy, do you have any sort of sense as to or do you have a vision for how best you think we should do this, or your committee, did you have a thought as to how you wanted to proceed on this?
Well, a lot of the information that we need, or that I'm envisioning the community needing, is information that we could gather. And there's a group of us that have started to organize at the community level in terms of we're going to be making phone calls and this and that. But the information is the same. After this meeting, my first step was to create a Google Doc to at least start listing the questions. So for example, what is the plan for the sixth grade? Because if they do go in order to remain part of the middle school, then what does that do to the numbers of the Ripton Elementary School? Because that probably brings the numbers down to below 40 because there's a big class of fifth graders now. And so getting that information and some enrollment about what the early enrollment will be. I mean, where how many 2 and 3 year olds do we have in town, so that we could project forward. Or likewise, information about the cost per pupil when we decided to join as a district we were already at the threshold, demonstrating where we are now as a district, which is actually, it had gone down initially. So projecting what even if there's not a budget yet, being able to use the information to, yes, ask the questions, but also have a grounding of information to back it up so that you could anticipate what the answer might be, even if we don't have the specific numbers. Does that answer your question? So in terms of process though, we talked a little bit about it today at a committee meeting without getting too far ahead because we knew we wanted to, get direction from the board. But we did talk about, using some of the same mechanisms that we have already, like maybe there's an e-chat that can demonstrate the positive things that the district has done, because we haven't really talked enough about that. Here's the difference being a district has made. And in the same time, organizing, the FAQs or other information to try to get out to, because it's really not just Ripton we're trying to reach, we're actually trying to reach all the communities. Because we want to make sure that other communities are seeing it's really in the best interest of all of us to remain a district. So I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, we would probably meet again to get into what are the methods, what are the mechanisms, but we did talk broadly about it. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in or if that answered your question.
Suzanne, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say that two things. One, wandering around the community, it's really hard for me as one community member to hear that other community members from other communities are like pitting one community against the other. And I've actually had conversations with people that they're like, so, this group here is saying that our school is going to close because they want to keep their school open, and, and feeling like they're caught in the middle. They've got kids in the school and they don't even know who to really trust anymore for information because everyone puts their own spin on it. But the other thing that hurts is that knowing that people feel they need to take this step, but yet members of the community don't have the answers to those questions. I mean, I mentioned this to a friend of mine, without saying any names, of course, and I just said, what would your thoughts on this be? And their comments back were, well, what would the cost be? You know, how much would it cost us? You know, where would the kids go to school? And they just kept listing off all these questions. But also knowing that some of the signs about the Ripton vote are being asked to be distributed around the district. I think we need to make sure that everyone in the district understands what's going on, what the process is, because if they start seeing these signs, they're going to wonder what's going on, and that's going to cause even more of a rift. So we just have to really make sure that we educate everyone.
Other comments, concerns? Jen.
I just have a question on the process for the other towns voting on the Ripton vote. From what I thought I read from what Peter shared, that it was that vote had to happen the same day. And maybe I misread it. So do we wait to see, do the other towns, I presume, wait to see what the results of that vote are and then potentially put it on their town meeting ballots? Or how would that process move forward with the other towns?
Peter B.
So there's my understanding, and I'm working just with the communications committee and outside of that committee to try to get some of this information together to share broadly, because I think it would be helpful, I think, from the legal perspective to provide a draft or a doc, and whether it's an FAQ or something else, I think that's important for us to share with people. My understanding is once a town has an affirmative vote to secede, the scheduling of the subsequent votes in the other 6 towns are not bound by a specific timeline. Usually in statute, there's 30 to 40 days or 7 days or 10 days, or things are bound pretty specifically in time. There is no specific time that the other towns are required to have that vote. So it could be town meeting, it could be in June, it could be in February, it could, from what I understand, it would be discussed and talked about in each town.
Peter, wouldn't the towns, so like if the town votes, don't they also have to wait, 30 days to make sure there's no petition to revote? And if that goes one way, then they can revote it one more time?
I believe so.
So I would think that conceivably, nothing could be done until probably the end of February or some point.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter, just from, if I know we've had many different conversations in many different communities, and were we officially notified of the Ripton submission? How does that process work?
We weren't officially notified. It was officially warned, and then I was sent a copy of the warning, but I wasn't officially notified.
Okay. Any other comments?
Just another comment on timing. Ripton's going to hold its informational meeting on January 5th, so timing is quick. And January 15th is very quick to get information out. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to answer these questions, since really at the end of the process, all ties between the district and the town are cut. So when you say, well, what happens when the 6th graders go to the middle school? Well, that's not necessarily going to happen. If you don't have a school for that age kids, you actually become a tuition town and give people the choice of where they want to go to school. And then we as a district take tuition kids if we have space. So, so many of these things are speculative. Really, it's based on the decision that the community makes after they are no longer part of the school district. I'll
just mention one of the kind of unknowns that I've seen just in reading different people's perspectives on this. What my understanding based on my own research of this is that ACSD would not revert back to an SU, or ACSU would not come to be again, and we would be ACSD, smaller, the individual town districts, and then an SU on top of that. More likely, it would be.
What do you mean an SU on top of that? We have two hats, or there's another SU?
So if ACSD, ACSD won't change, but what they would have to do would be to create an SU again. The former ACSU would have to exist to essentially govern if these districts were still a part of this current district. They would have to have an SU. The ACSD group would stay minus the towns that secede, and then you'd have those other towns as well. So there was an understanding of some people thought that might happen, as part of this process if there are affirmative votes. But what I'm saying is my understanding is that wouldn't happen, and that the state board would assign those districts that are seceding to a nearby SU. So that would be Greater Rutland, Rutland Northeast, or White River Valley.
And Peter Conlon, is that your understanding as well?
Yes, that ACSD would just be one town smaller. We do not become a supervisory union. We remain a school district, and that those supervisory union functions would have to be found elsewhere.
Amy?
And just to bring that full circle, that is some of the information that on the frequently asked questions and the Save Our Schools website that doesn't capture that. The assumption with that information is that basically we become ACSU again. So that's for example one of the threads that we need to make sure that people understand.
And does that assume that, there's elementary age kids in these towns, but there's also middle school and high school kids in Ripton or fill in the blank. Those kids then would be required to leave that school. Is that true?
Required to leave which school?
Like if they're at Mom's right now and they withdraw, they successfully secede, that child who's at Mom's no longer goes to Mom's.
So it depends what the arrangement is for the seceded district. So they most likely would be able to tuition their students, but tuitioning means you're not necessarily, you're not part of the governing group for the school. And then we take tuition students on a capacity basis, so it's not a guarantee as well.
It would also open up choice. Unless there was some arrangement made where we were at the designated school, you basically, if you're paying tuition for your students, then they have the choice of going to any public or approved independent school with those tuition dollars.
Gotcha. Chip?
I don't think I heard the answer to the question that if in fact Ripton or a town votes to secede and none of the other jurisdictions in that district vote to allow them to secede, that then it is dead? Is that true? They cannot secede? I guess
Yeah, they need every town to say yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Just think of it as the opposite reverse process as to what created the unified district. Every town had to vote in favor of creating it.
Right.
But I mean, hopefully we as a community don't get there, because the practicality of what that would look like, personally, I can't imagine an organization, a community organization, where there are folks who have asked to leave and now they're being forced to stay, being a healthy environment in the beginning. Hopefully we'd be able to work through it and find a way, but that's a very difficult position to put community members in, and I hope we don't get there. Any other comments or questions? So Peter, what's next steps now with all this?
That's me, Peter.
Yeah, Peter B.
Next steps, as I mentioned, I want to create a public-facing document so people can see the answers to some of these questions, the legal questions, and so I think the next steps are communications committee talking about what beyond the legal questions, what other information is important for people to know as we're moving pretty quickly towards that January vote.
Okay. Peter Conlon, any other thoughts from your perspective? Okay. And I know this was spurred by, well, not just, but this type of dialogue, as John Flowers had asked for an opinion of, or a response from the board. And while we don't have a sentence or a consensus voice, I do think we have shared the tremendous challenge that we are in right now, and the hope that as a community we come together to find a path forward, and that this is complicated and difficult, but personally I have faith that we're going to be able to do that. Great. Now the other I also know that I believe we have all received a letter from a concerned parent, and at this time, after reviewing the letter and reviewing the issues that were presented, I would like to direct and ask Peter B. to take on the specificity of responding and start the process of looking into and addressing those concerns, and then reporting back to the board kind of where we are and what has been done from an action perspective. I'll respond to the parent stating that we have read the letter and have asked you to do so. And we'll go on from, once we hear back from you, if that's okay.
I think that sounds perfect.
Great. Peter B., you okay with that?
Yep.
Super. Okay, that's all I have for other. I think the next thing is adjournment.
So moved.
So moved. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.